the Martial Arts Movie Podcast.
I threw that shit before I walked in the room.
Featuring drunken Thai boxer, Will.
Too bad you will die.
The also drunken wrestler, Mark.
I said I don't want trouble.
And drunken karate master, Zero.
You've lost your balls.
And now,
Call. I know Kung Fu.
You know, baby.
Fists of Fail.
All right, we're finally doing The Raid 2, a movie that I've been wanting to watch for forever again. I fucking love this movie. I feel like most of us would be, right? But I remembered how long this movie was. and unfortunately, I'm experiencing some back pain right now. Just being old, I guess. And my way of combating that was, okay, I tried ibuprofen, all my avenues, and whenever I experience back pain or any sort of pain that's very crippling, I decide to have an edible. So I thought to myself, why don't I have one right before this movie so that halfway through this almost 3-hour venture, I can, appreciate it a different way. It only kicked in as soon as the movie was over. And then I just sat there in silence and like, did I just watch that? And I just started contemplating. It's like how violent the movie was after the fact.
Yes, this is a very, 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 very violent movie. For people who've not even seen the first one, that one's violent.
Oh, yeah.
This one... It does what a sequel should do. It ramps everything up. Mm-hmm. Violence gets ramped up. Story gets more complicated. Things feel bigger and more grandiose, but in a good way, Mm-hmm. And it's weird because people still kind of reference the first one a lot anytime there is a situation where you have to fight your way out of something, right?
Okay, yeah.
Like people always compare it to like, oh, it's like The Raid, but with this.
Yeah.
And I don't think you could do that with this movie because it's such a departure in terms of the story. Right. It could have been, oh, Iko's stuck in another building and he needs to fight his way out, an even bigger building. Like they could have easily gone that route. Thankfully, they don't. But it's everything just gets more complicated, but in more positive ways.
Right. Well, this movie's The Raid, but with crime families. I guess. I don't know.
Is there Raid even any raiding going on?
No, not really. Gareth Evans even said initially, as soon as The Raid 1 finished production, he thought he was already writing the script for was the prototype for this movie. And it was supposed to be a standalone film. And it kind of shows at times, right? Because you almost feel like there's almost no connection to the first movie. I think you talked about this off camera or off mic last time you and I were talking. But then as soon as the word of mouth of The Raid 1 being so being as great as it is, and it started to garner so much attention, he rewrote the script to be a continuation of the first movie. Although he does kind of like, you can kind of see where like the references to the first movie end. It's like, all right, we made the connections. Now it's its own movie.
Yeah.
My
understanding with this film is this actually came before The Raid. They realized that it was too big in scope in terms of fighting and action and everything. Wow. So they shelved it. They actually kept all the fight choreography. And they decided to make everything brand new because for The Raid, it was going to be a more simple, condensed story.
Right. And there's a nice simplicity to the first Raid. I mean, that movie's great because of like how bare bones the story is. This is the complete opposite. There is a lot of story in this movie.
There's a lot of story, and
yeah.
This is only the second time I've seen this movie. After the first watch, I knew that I liked it, and I didn't want to see it again because it was a lot to take in. That movie is exhausting in the most positive way I could say. Because
are you referring to the first one, or are you talking about this one right here?
The second one.
The second one. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, the second one. After watching that movie, like you feel for Iko at the end because you have gone through this long ass journey with him. You're with him in those exhausting battles. And at the end I was like, oh, okay. I don't need to watch that again. And
Yeah.
I guess, let's see, the movie came out 2014, so it's been 7 years since I've seen it. So, yeah.
I've been dying to see this again, but I knew that it was. I haven't seen this since the release either. I saw this in theaters. One of the few martial arts films that I actually have the opportunity to see, and it had garnered like a full audience. It was
really?
Like my theater was packed. There are actually distinct moments from this movie that I remember how the audience reacted to it. That's how memorable this experience was. I saw this and the first movie in theaters, but I feel like we got more reactions out of the second one. And but yeah, like I think the reason why I didn't watch it again was because it was so incredibly long, and some of it could have been condensed for sure.
Oh yeah.
There's an entire character that's in the movie, which I don't want to seem incredibly nitpicky.
I know exactly who you're talking about, and I have probably the exact same opinion on removing him completely.
Yeah. But, well, I mean, yeah, you could totally make a cut of the version where I mean, we could say it right here. Yayan is in the movie. Not the same character he was in the first movie.
Correct.
This isn't really a spoiler. I mean, he doesn't add anything to the movie except for this tiny little, he
is the catalyst for the gang war at the end. They use him in order to get, everything kind of started. But they could have easily wrote around that.
Right.
He didn't need to be there, but we can go into that in a little more detail later.
Yeah, of course.
I want to share my movie going experience
sure
with this film. So you said you got to see this in a packed house, with a bunch of other people. So I got to see this movie in an advanced screening for free before it was going to come out in the US officially. And I thought, oh man, this is going to be great. I'm going to be here with like a bunch of other martial arts fans because they I think they were kind of advertising it on places where they, other martial arts enthusiasts would find it. And when I got there, I want to say there was probably only 20 people in the theater.
Really?
And it was in the SVA theater, the theater where we saw Raging Fire. So imagine that theater. Imagine only 20 people. Now imagine that the director, Gareth Evans, was there. Iko Uwais was there. And Hammer Girl was there.
Julia Stell,
Yeah, for a Q&A afterwards. And I was so grateful that these people were here, but I felt really, I don't want to say embarrassed. I felt awkward that like a big audience didn't show up for it. It was a weird feeling. Like I was happy, but I kept on kind of turning around for reactions from people,
All right. Well, this time you could watch it in the comfort of your own home. So the only people's responses that you care about are your own.
Pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. You're probably part of that first wave of immediate initial responses. And your responses probably dictated the word of mouth that eventually got people like me who watched it like the day of the theatrical release.
I think the notoriety of the first film could have carried that without any sort of pre-word of mouth, because this, the first one was just so well received.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but at the same time, I can understand if someone was to watch the first one. And, they have a preconceived notion that, like, it's just straight up action. And it really is. It's just nonstop fighting and very little plot. There is plot, but there's very little. This one, there's a lot of plot, but at the same time, there's a lot of fighting. So it's not like they compromised on anything. It's just like, all right, we have a lot of fighting still. In fact, I think there might even be more. Because
I think there's more fighting in this one.
I started counting, and I think there must be a lot more fighting or fight scenes in this movie altogether. And we're not saying quantity over quality, but my God, like I didn't think that they would, I think the quality of the fights are actually kind of even better than the first one. I like the fights a lot more in this movie. A lot of them are a lot more memorable, and I think a lot of it has to do with the obvious elephant in the room. We have different sets. We have different locations.
Right.
All these things add up.
Things, your eye can look at different locations other than apartment complex.
Yeah, and that's kind of nice. I feel like every fight scene, or basically every scene, is so visually distinct from the next. It breaks up the monotony. I mean, there's a story as well, so that definitely adds to it. So feel like it's pretty engaging for the most part. Before I continue, do you want to take a crack at the story?
Sure. So after the events of the first movie, Iko and friends escape the building, and they believe that that the evidence they got at the end of the movie is going to be enough to put away whomever, all the big people involved. Yep. And his superior tells him that that's not the case. You can't put away people fairly or legally or, correctly through the legal system. So he sends Iko undercover into prison to befriend the son of a major mob
crime
boss.
Lord, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Crime lord, whatever. And it's just about him doing that and all the shenanigans that come along with it.
Okay. All right. Now we've seen this kind of story like countless times in these prison dramas / like cop procedural movies.
Yes.
Where someone's like undercover and it basically is a mole for the police until they can infiltrate the highest order of the crime family. But I don't know what it is. There's something about this movie that reminds me of something I read in college when I took film literacy, or one of those classes that was like elective that I don't remember anything about. But the one thing that I read in a book, and I don't remember the author, I don't remember the name of the book. I just remember this one thing that was written in there, which was like in the first Indiana Jones film, and you'll know what I'm talking about, and I'll get to my point in a second. In the first Indiana Jones film, that movie's great, but the quote-unquote problem with it is that the main character doesn't have anything to do with the story, doesn't affect the story, or doesn't affect the outcome.
I've heard this argument where if you took Indiana Jones out of it, the movie...
Yeah, it's the same.
The plot could still go on without him. He doesn't technically move anything forward.
Yeah. And I watched this movie like about a year out of college, and I remember that quote just like really staying fresh in my mind. I was like, I guess you could take Iko out of the movie and nothing would really change, right?
No, I would say that's incorrect.
No?
Because in an important fight scene, he saves the major mob boss's son's life. And if he was not there to do that, then that the whole gang war would have never happened.
Right. There's I guess there are some pivotal moments in the movie, but then outside of that, Iko does take a little back seat towards the middle of the movie. He comes back with a vengeance at the very end, and it's just like relentless how much he has to go through. But there is a portion in the movie where it's really, he just kind of disappears from the movie, or he's kind of like sidelined a lot story-wise. So that's why it kind of feels that way for me. That, like, he just kind of disappears from the film. But when he comes back, he's like, all right, it's the Iko Uwais show.
Right. So there is a point. So this is a long movie. It's 2.5 hours long. There's a point in the movie where the pacing finally like hit a lull for me, because everything was, I was fully engaged. It's a little bit of a slow burn, but you're constantly getting fed information. You want to know what Iko needs to do next, how things need to unravel, how he's going to get out of his very, very dire situation. And unfortunately, once Yayan appears, like, I felt like the pacing just drop.
Yeah.
Because I think that kind of goes in line with what you were saying, where he leaves and then other stuff happens, and the other stuff happens for me was not interesting. And I could feel it was really shoehorned in there because everybody loves Yayan. He's great.
Oh, yeah, he's great.
Amazing fighter, did the choreography of the movie, and they just gave him another character to be.
Yeah.
And I don't feel he should have been there. I think that really should have been cut out.
Right. Well, Gareth obviously didn't want to do the movie in general if he couldn't get Yayan to do the choreography again, right? I mean, I think Yayan's style of choreography is very it's like a very signature thing of his. I feel like it's like the trifecta, right? Like in order to make any of them work well with one another, you need Gareth Evans as the directing seat. You need Yayan as a choreographer, and you need Iko as lead. Like that's like the trinity. You take one component out, it's like it doesn't really work. So yeah, like I'm glad Yayan's actually in the movie doing the choreography, but then his character is just kind of like there.
He's supposed to be a sympathetic hitman, and they just do very tropey stuff with him. Hey, he misses his son. Hey, I'm gonna look at a picture of my son in this trinket that I wear. It's like, oh, come on.
I didn't mind all that stuff. I didn't. I would have just preferred it wasn't in the movie, though. I mean, tropey as it is, it adds two fight scenes, which the first one's okay. The second one I actually kind of like. There's some good things that gleam off of it, but yeah, like it just adds padding to the movie, and you could easily replace his character with like some Japanese mob boss character that like is inconsequential, and it would change nothing.
I would say don't even have his character in there, because they were going to they were going to have the mob boss's son wanted the gang more anyway. I think he could have just went for it without needing Yayan's character as a catalyst.
Right. But the whole movie is revolving around Arifin. I'm gonna mispronounce it. Putra. Yeah. I think he does his own dubbing in the English dub of the movie, because I've watched this in the in theaters and it was dubbed from what I remember. I know. But
Dubs.
We're purists here. And the whole movie is revolving around him. He's obviously the son of the Indonesian crime boss who is at odds with the Japanese crime family, and he just wants to start a gang war, essentially, because he's basically like your entitled, arrogant, prick of a character who wants power, but his father's not allowing it. He's like the warmonger when his father is like a pacifist, so he sees his dad as like weak as a result of that.
Right. His father used to be this menacing figure that everybody kind of feared.
Yeah.
That fear has died down, and now his son feels like, oh, why is that happening? We should keep that fear alive. We should be taking the power.
Yeah, one thing that the movie tries to do is set this character up, his and Iko's character relation up, almost like there's like a small budding romance, maybe like some sort of camaraderie between the two, and then there's
definitely a brotherhood between them a little bit,
but he's such a dick, and it almost feels like it's not really there. Towards the end of the movie, they try to pull out your heartstrings just a little bit, and it's like, I don't know. It almost feels like this isn't really earned. He's just been kind of a douche throughout the whole movie and not treating Iko well whatsoever.
Right.
So yeah, I didn't really get that. And we're talking a lot about the story and stuff because the movie is very, very story driven. But yeah, there's a ton of fighting in the movie. I think my favorite thing about this movie, revolving around the action, is all the techniques that they try to use, that they actually successfully used in the movie to accomplish all the feats, like the final product, basically. Mm-hmm. All like practical and digital effects being added together, like all things that they did with the scenery and the sets design, like how they made things dynamic, and you can like literally cut out walls. Like it's great. And I don't know if you knew this, Zero. I was watching the behind the scenes. Gareth Evans edited on set.
Yeah, I read that detail.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
with
crazy.
modern technology, we can do that. You know, you don't have
Yeah.
to wait for film to get developed and then bring it to that room, bring it to that big reel,
Yeah.
and then go.
Right. I think the
Look
traditional
through that old viewfinder.
Yeah. The traditional route was, I mean, people still, they take multiple cuts of everything, but that obviously cuts down a lot on production. It's like, okay, well, let's take the footage, edit it really quickly, just to see if what we're missing or if things need to be done again, and that's awesome. And also it's just great to like actually have like the director's eye, like they're on set, so they can tweak little things. I don't know, like everything's just there's a lot of like things that work in the movie. I actually find this a little hard to find things that don't work. Like, so again, there might be a little bit of a reverse of my usual MO of being the super nitpicky guy.
That's great, because I'll be the nitpicky person.
Oh, okay, great.
For
Awesome.
this one. Yeah, I love the technical side of the choreography and everything, because it's very, very evident that a lot of work had to go into designing the action, designing how complicated these fights are, because there's a lot of fighting and a lot of it goes on for a long time. There's a lot of very long takes as well. So you can't just half-ass that stuff and then just expect to fix it in the editing room. So I really appreciate the movie in that aspect. But I don't know. When I was thinking about it, I couldn't really remember a lot of fight scenes after I first watched the film. And this is before I was really analyzing fights. I remember coming out of it thinking like, okay, I know the fighting was good. Like I could understand that. But when I was trying to think about it, like I couldn't remember like as much as I like wanted to. Like I think the ones that stood out to me were the ones that were just very, very visually clear and interesting. Like the Hammer Girl fight, because it is a woman fighting with two hammers on a subway. That's memorable for a reason. Like that's like a gimme.
Yep.
And then the last fight, I only remembered that because I remembered thinking, this is really long. I'm getting exhausted watching this. Like it's like an exercise in endurance for Iko and Sisef, and then the audience member as well, because there's not a lot of breaks in that fight, right?
There are breaks that they actually give you an actual intermission.
I know. But like when the fight's happening, it just keeps going. And that's how a lot of the fights in this movie are. They just, once they start, it goes on until you're done. And then you're just like, okay, is it over yet? Okay, good. And like the characters themselves, that's finally your chance to breathe.
Yeah. The most, for better or for worse, especially with the Indonesian films. I mean, maybe not in general, but the trend that Gareth Evans started was, like, we are going to stand out from the pack, from the rest of the martial arts world, by making our action hyper violent. Like, okay, maybe hyper violent isn't the best way to describe it, because like it is super violent, obviously. But then people say the same thing about like Tarantino movies, like they're hyper violent, or but like this is, I like to consider like these movies, the Raid movies, hyper realistic violent. Like, yeah,
that's a good way of putting it.
Okay, it's not like Tarantino where it's like people are gushing blood and it's like, okay, that's like stylized and like it's so hyper violent, like exaggerated violence. These movies are like, they show the violence, but it's so realistic. It becomes like uncanny valley effect, where it's like it leans so much towards the realistic side that it starts to feel like foreign to us, and then as a result it feels less realistic, like a ragdoll effect. Have you ever seen someone like get ragdoll in real life. Like they get hit by a car, they're flying around. You don't expect them to actually have like ragdoll physics, but that's what happens. And it looks weird. It's like, so these movies, like for the most part, sometimes the violence is like super stylized and silly looking, but other times it's like, oh, that guy's like bleeding in a very realistic fashion. That's kind of like unsettling, and it has like the inverse effect in making it feel less realistic, or your perception of it is less realistic. Or maybe this is all me and I'm just speaking out my ass right now. But yeah, that's how I like look at these films. Like the violence is like the centerpiece of the action, and like I think the most memorable moments are the ones where like, oh, look at that guy's head being split open. Oh, look at that guy's arm being ripped apart. And it's sometimes less. It's more of that and less of the actual choreography. So that could be considered a negative thing.
Just to jump on that a little bit. So like when Tarantino does violence, he does it in a way where it's bloody and kind of realistic, but it goes to this point where it becomes kind of silly because of how excessive it can be.
Yeah.
So there's kind of like a likable enjoyment to that where you can kind of laugh at it. Not because it's funny, but because it's so over the top, it gives you that feeling of like, oh, whoa, that's crazy. In this movie, when violent things happen, the intent from the attackers is, I want to hurt you, or like I want to kill you.
Yep.
And there's nothing funny about it.
Oh yeah.
Right. Like this takes the violence very, very seriously, and it but it almost always feels like we're not laughing at anything happening, right?
For the most part, yeah.
There are knee-jerk reactions where something extremely violent happens, but you cringe or you groan out loud.
Yeah.
But you're not like, whoa, that was great. You're just like, oh.
Yeah. I mean, the movie is notorious for both these movies are notorious for a reason. Like it is hyper violent, hyper realistic violent. Like they portray the violence as almost like matter of fact. Sometimes it's like something gory is happening, like borderline gory is happening on screen, and it's just like they're just like, all right, let's just gonna move on to the next thing. Like don't focus on it. It's like sometimes, and other times it's like, all right, let's really hone in on the fact that this guy's mouth is getting split open because someone is pulling it open.
Right.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that fight too because I know you're not a big fan of it.
You would be wrong.
Oh yeah? Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
maybe we'll talk about that in the action segment of this if you listen to us on Patreon.
Oh yeah. You should do that because our podcast episodes are actually a lot longer if you look at the timestamp. I noticed that we're getting like 30 minutes, in on Anchor and whatnot, and then I always forget that we've actually spoken about an hour's worth of fighting.
We're probably going to talk about this for a lot longer because there was so much fighting in this. But check us out on Patreon because now we're going to talk about the actual action. Unless there's something else you want to talk about first, Zero.
No, let's get into it.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to the podcast. We're at the point where we give our recommendations, but there's a whole wealth of audio you would be listening to here if you follow us on Patreon. There you can listen to the entire episode, including an exclusive action breakdown of the fights in the movie. And now on to our final thoughts. I will say, I mean, without spoiling the ending, I don't like the way it ends. It's like almost bittersweet. It ends kind of inconclusively. Almost like they're trying to set up for a raid 3, but not really. It's like it doesn't have to have a raid 3 technically.
Did you hear his? Did you see his interview?
Yeah,
so they're never.
I don't know what the
raid.
latest news is because last thing he said it's not happening.
Yeah, he said it's not happening, and he gave his original pitch for the movie. It wasn't gonna. It was gonna be more about the Japanese mob. Like I think Iko wasn't even gonna be in it. I can't recall.
If you watch the ending, you can kind of assume what happened to the character if that's the case. But I don't know. It'd be weird
I think
without
that's
Iko.
kind of up for interpretation, actually.
Yeah,
because they intentionally cut out the audio.
Right. Whereas the first movie was like, I mean, both these movies are really dark and somber and very gritty. The first one kind of ends on a good note. This movie just does not have any like positive uptones like ever. It's just like always stays in this really dark territory, and it ends in a dark place. And it's like, oh, kind of want like Iko to kind of rise above it.
Well, you get that moment before he goes into the last action scene where he's speaking with his wife again, and that's supposed to be his. Okay, you're safe. Okay, I'm gonna torpedo my. He literally kamikazes in there because I think the idea was he knows he's gonna die. Yeah. He just wants to get in there and kind of take care of everything.
Right. I mean, like at this point, because we're 2 movies in, and especially since this movie specifically is so long, kind of want the character to like live on and like do more things after this. But then like the end of the movie is so ambiguous. It's a good thing and bad thing. It's bittersweet. But yeah, Raid 2, fucking intense, man.
Well, based off this very, very long conversation we had, it's
still not as long as a movie.
There's a lot to talk about with this film, but that was all the action. We couldn't even really cover all of it in detail because there's just so much, yeah. In
the best way possible, and it's almost a shame that they're not going to do a Raid 3, but at the same time, like I'm actually kind of glad because it's very hard to top this movie, and they have to go even further with like everything that they accomplished in this movie. It's not even up for debate. Like I definitely recommend this movie. I fucking loved it when I first watched it. It's up there when it comes to like the iconic martial arts movies. Like it's probably one of the more recent iconic, in quotes, iconic must-watch martial arts movies. But yeah, it's there for a reason. And it's just, the real question is whether or not to just watch the fight. Oh, well, one, we could always ask this, is just to watch the fight scenes without context. I think you need to watch the movie. But you could still enjoy the fights without context. That's how fucking good they are. But the real question is it better than the first movie?
I think that from a technical aspect it is, because you can see they set their benchmark with the first movie, which is pretty good, and they knew what they wanted to do. They made everything bigger and better. Yep. They went for a sequel that was going to surpass what they originally did. Yep. But the thing is, the first movie is still pretty good. I think
it's still good, yeah.
So that's what I mean. Like the first movie is still pretty good. I think this is just a better film in terms of like making sure they outdid themselves, even though the first one is still good.
Yeah, that's why I don't want to Raid 3, because of the fact that like they outdid themselves. I can't imagine, imagine how long the final fight sequences would be. They'd be like 20 minutes each, like 5 in a row. That's the only way to top Raid 2, because it's just that insane. I don't know. I said my piece. Like, Zero, what are your thoughts on the Raid 2?
Yeah, I mean, basically everything you said. I am very critical of this film because I think it's very good, and it might have sounded like I hated that last fight, which I don't. I felt exhausted watching this movie.
Everyone does.
Everyone does, but as I was critical with the Yayan fight where I felt it wasn't needed, like I'm very big on cutting things out that aren't necessary. Yeah. Even though I like fights, I love watching fight scenes. Like I want them to feel like they're not excessive sometimes. And in terms of the movie, an excessively long fight makes sense because we need to feel tired with Iko at the end. But for me, I wasn't digging the beginning of that fight anyway. I did like the end of it when the karambits come out.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, I don't know what else to add to that. This movie is freaking great. I definitely say check it out. And I don't know, it's a fucking Raid 2. It's great. Do you? Without saying, I mean, we both know that the first movie is also is also a great martial arts movie. What are your thoughts? Like, if you have to recommend one versus the other? Or is that even not fair to compare the two?
I don't think that's fair, because they're different films. You're not raiding anymore in the second movie.
Yeah.
The first movie is very well known now because it kind of set up its own kind of like archetype. Yeah. Trapped in a building against, a whole slew of opponents trying to fight your way out. It's kind of like Die Hard, but they did it a little differently, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, because now you hear people say, oh, it's like the Raid, but with this.
Yeah. The Raid definitely like set the standard when it comes to
exactly
their own thing.
I don't hear people say it's like the Raid 2, but
the Raid 2 is more complicated.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's why I like the Raid 2 more. There's an actual story. The first movie's super self-contained. It's like very A to B with a tiny little twist in the middle. But this movie is like there's so much going on, and I actually kind of like that, even from a storytelling standpoint. It's a little bit more. I don't know if engaging is the word I want to use. But it's a little bit more intriguing, I guess, because there's a little bit more like twists and turns here and there. But it does make for a longer movie, so I don't know. Okay, so the Raid 2, go check it out. And if you're still on the fence, like, fucking stop this episode right now. Go watch it. That's all I'm gonna say.
So let me end on a final note with my screening of the Raid 2.
Yeah.
I got to see Gareth, Julie, and Iko speak about the film. And because there's only 20 people in the movie theater, it wasn't like a lot of people were asking questions or anything like that. Once the Q&A ended, like, we all left together, everybody on stage, and then all the audience members. And I got up and I started walking out, and I realized I was walking next to Iko. And so I turned to him and I said, "Oh, I really liked your movie." And he said, "Thank you."
And that's when you take out your karambit and you both have a fight in the middle of the theater.
Yes.